Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Kovav, last daf of the Masechet, of the parak, and we pick up at the bottom of Kufhem Bet, and we are with Masa Shechaltzu. So we're finishing the opinion in the Mishnah that you don't need a beis din, that it said that maybe only two or even fewer is good. Rabbi Shimon and Yochanan Hassan, we said we don't rule that way, but you do need a beis din. We also said lechatchila 3 is enough. But then we're talking, there's a story that a man did chalitza between him and privately, b'veit asur in prison. Rabbi Akiva said it was kosher. So Rabbi Akiva is now the seemingly author of this position that b'diavad you don't need a beit din. So let's see what the Gemara says. Ma'aser shechaltzu, 5 lines from the bottom on Kofem Bet. So the Gemara says, Beino leveina miyadana. How do we know it was between them? Meaning, okay, they're reporting it, but like, how can we paskin? Like maybe as far as God is concerned, she's a chalutza, but how can we as a beis din rule that way? Like it's just, what evidence do we have? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yonah Shmuel ve'edim roina samim b'chut. No, there were witnesses that seen it from the outside, and they were enough to provide evidence that the event had occurred, but not, A, they weren't a beis din, and number 2, this gets into a whole question of when you need eidim, not just as proof that something occurred, but to actually effectuate it, make it considered legally binding, like, for example, by a Kiddushin, if you have 100% knowledge that it occurred, if there were not witnesses, it's not legally binding. That's called Eidei Kiyum, as opposed to Eidei Bira, which are just to clarify, to bring evidence. So there could be that for the need of Eidei Kiyum, you need not just them to have seen it, but you need the participants to be aware that the Eidim were there. You need them to be more physically present. So here it's saying we have enough that suffices as evidence that it occurred, but they're certainly, because people were looking at it from the outside, but they were certainly not a beis din and might not even have been Eidim that were effectuating the chalitza. Okay, so in principle, it was done completely private, even though there's sufficient evidence, even though we do know as a matter of fact that it did occur. Okay, Eidim rono sami b'chut. Now there is the question. Did the story of this chalitza, this private chalitza, happen outside, out of prison? And Rabbi Akiva, though, was reformed about it in prison, because Rabbi Akiva was imprisoned by the Romans before he was martyred. Or do we say the event happened in prison, and the story came to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva wasn't in prison. So who was in prison? The participants of Rabbi Akiva. So Amar Rav Yehuda Marav beis asurin hayamasa ulu beis asurin ba'masa. It happened in prison, and it came to Rabbi Akiva in prison. Now, Tosfos points out that in the Mishnah, it's a bizarre question, because the Mishnah is very clear that the story happened in prison. The language of the Mishnah was, Maise be'echad shechos beino leveina b'veit ha'asurin, right? So clearly the event was in prison, and then it was reported to Rabbi Akiva. He says, well, if you don't have the vav of uba masa, you have masa shechalot beino leveina b'veit ha'asurin, period. Ba masa lifnei Rabbi Akiva v'yichshir. Then it would be possible to read it, masa shechalot beino leveina, period. B'veit ha'asurin ba masa lifnei Rabbi Akiva. So if you drop the vav, it's maybe possible to read it that way, but it's still a stretch. And Tosfos says the reason, and certainly why would you read it both ways? It happened in prison, brought to Rabbi Akiva. So Tosfos says if you look at the Yerushalmi, it seems that there was a tradition, not only that Rabbi Akiva had been imprisoned by the Romans, but there was a tradition that this story had been brought to him in prison. And therefore we're trying to read that into the Mishnah as well. And he brings out a fascinating story about how they communicated with him in prison to ask this question. So if you look at the 3 lines from the bottom of the page of the last Tosfos, he says like this. The end of the 3rd line from the bottom. V'yesh lomar diyodea hagemara, or 2 lines from the bottom. Shabal lefanav veis hasurin. They knew it, that it happened to him in prison, so we want to read that into the Mishnah. Kedama b'Yerushalmi, and here's the story in Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar, and remember, the person in the Mishnah before Rabbi Akiva that was quoted to say that you don't need a chalitza in front of a beis din was Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. Like they were the 2 in the Mishnah that said that you don't need a beis din. So here's the way the Yerushalmi has a story. The same Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, Avar Kumi Chavushin. to Rabbi Akiva. He passed by the prison of Rabbi Akiva. Hayamachriz Amar, and he was like announcing and saying, Man by machtin, man by tzinon. Who needs needles? Who needs pins? Like he was posing as a salesman so he could get a secret message to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, they weren't smuggling like a file in a cake. They were smuggling in halachic shilas.
And he was a cover.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. Although he's selling pins and needles, and then he sort of in the middle of who needs pins, who needs needles, he said, Ma by machtin, man by tzinon, chalza beino lebein amahu. Who knows what happened if the chalitza was in private? Who needs pins? Who needs needles? So adik le meishe min kavase. So Rabbi Akiva stuck his head out of the prison window, like between the bars. Okay, and Amar lehen, he said to him, Islach kushin, Islach kasher. Do you have kushin? Which I think are, I don't know, some types of like a pin cushion. I'm not sure exactly what kushin are. Anyway, like some type of a kush is like, I don't know, like what. Anyway, and then in the middle of saying, do you have kushin, which sounds like kosher, he snuck in the word, it's kosher. So okay, so that's how they had their secret communication in prison. All right. Anyway, by the way, so that's the story with Rabbi Akiva. But we paskin, you need 3 b'diavad, and 3 even suffices l'chatchila. And if you take a look at the little Tosfos before that, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan, Sandlar, Machshem b'shnai. I'm sorry, the 2 before that, l'chatchila b'chamisha. I would have thought you needed 5 l'chatchila, and the Gemara said yesterday, no, you only need 3. So the Gemara says, Mikan yishgamo de'ein tar chamisha afi l'chatchila. That even l'chatchila you don't need 5. Even l'chatchila 3 is the right number. And b'diavad you need 3. Umihu, if you're assuming nilsa, avdinim l'chamisha. Even though l'chatchila you don't, to make it better, we do 5 anyway. Because remember, going back to that whole Gemara about publicizing it more. Okay, top of Kavav Amud Aleph. Tanu Rabbanan. Rabbi taught. Chalitza mutet kshera. A tricked chalitza or a deceived chalitza is kosher. Ezu chalitza mutet. What is a deceived chalitza? Amar Rabbi Reish Lakish kol sha'omin lo chalo to bekachat hakonsa. There was a man who basically, for some reason, wanted to do yibum, and he was like, it was improper, either because they thought he wasn't doing it l'shem shamayim, or he was just interested in his money, whatever the case was, her money, excuse me. So they basically wanted to persuade him to do chalitza. Right, nowadays you could have a case that the guy just whatever. We'll worry about that later. Okay, so therefore he wanted to do yibum, but they were trying to get him to do chalitza. So what they said to him was, "Hey, buddy, look, go through this chalitza ceremony, and then she'll be your wife." That's how we do yibum these days. Okay, is we do a chalitza ceremony. Wow. So, which is fine. Plenty of people are not knowledgeable about the specifics. Okay, the question is, presumably this would be a perfect time where they might want to drop the reciting of the verses, which make it a little bit explicit what the whole thing is about, right? Etc. And we learned that if you don't do the reciting of the verses, it's okay. So therefore, that would be a deceived chalitza, which would be kosher. So Amalei Rabbi Yochanan said back to the to Reish Lakish, Ani Shona, I teach. Bein sheniskavin hu v'lo niskavin he. Bein sheniskavin he v'lo niskavin hu. If he had kavanah not he, or she had kavanah not he, chalitza sapsula, it's invalid. Ad sheniskavin shneim, both of them have to intend for it to be an effective chalitza. So and your tell is saying chalitza sakshera, that if you think it affects yibum, that it's kosher. Now maybe you could say you intend to do chalitza, not some other act, not like Linzer said before, just helping somebody remove their shoe. But he's saying it's not just kavanah to do an act of chalitza, but it's understanding what the act is going to effectuate. So how could you say it's kosher if you think it's going to effectuate its opposite, yibum? So that's not chalitza mutet. That's totally pasul. So Ella, here's a chalitza mutet that's kosher. They bribe him and they say, agree to do chalitza with her, and she'll give you 200 zuz. But then she's not planning on giving it, and she doesn't give it in the end. And nevertheless, even though he was tricked, right, that might be a better word than deceived, tricked, it's still kosher, because still he had the intent that it should be a chalitza and it should be effective. Okay? Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly, chalitza mute is kshera, a tricked chalitza is kosher. Ezuhi chalitza mute, kol she'amim you say to him, chalotzla, do a chalitza to Ramanat Latitin L'chamatayim zuz, she'll give you 200 zuz. And Maisa ba'isha achat shenafla lifnei yabam, and there was a story with a certain woman who fell before a brother-in-law. Shein hagunla was not fitting for her, for whatever reason, as we'll see in a minute. And they said to him, do chalitza and she'll give you 200 zuz. And the story came to Rabbi Akiva, and he said it was kosher, even though she didn't give the 200 zuz, even though she never planned on giving the 200 zuz. Now, the question is, okay, you understand why you might want to trick somebody into it in order to do the right thing. Of course, if Rivka had with your Allah Shalom, she would obviously point out that already in the Gemara, you're getting the idea of basically, it's not a big move from bribing a guy and tricking a guy to setting a precedent for extortion and having the guy go ahead and then use this as a tool for extorting money. Although, which obviously very sadly happens so often in cases of Gittin today. But here at least, they were not going to, they were going to make the promise and not follow it through. Of course, I don't know how you hope that you get away with that trick more than a few times before people start finding out, which is another question. But the halachic question becomes, I don't understand. If they said almanat and they made it conditional, how could it not work? How could it work without satisfying the condition? So here, Rashi quotes the famous statement in the Gemara Gittin that says that, in the Gemara in Ksuvos, that any condition, any act that cannot be given over to a shaliach cannot be made conditional. So what does that mean? It means I can have you appoint you as my agent to buy something for me. And therefore, I can also make a sale or a purchase on condition. I can appoint you as my agent to give a get to my wife, or to receive, or the woman could make somebody an agent, a man or a woman, to receive a get from her husband. So therefore, since agency is possible, stipulations and conditions are possible. But you cannot have somebody be an agent to do yibum, for example, and you can't have somebody as an agent to do chalitza, only the parties themselves. And therefore, conditions are also not binding. Now, what's the logic behind that?
For Yibum.
Yeah, I was teasing, but obviously you can't do that. So, but you also can't do it for chalitza. So, what is the logic? Why should stipulations be tied to agency? And the logic is that, and this is an important point that I haven't mentioned until now, but a very famous Reb Chaim about chalitza. He also asks, why is it possible that a minor woman, we learned yesterday, there's a serious opinion that she might be kosher to do chalitza, right? Normally, biblically, an act can't be done by a minor, like a legally binding act, like a sale or a transaction or whatever. Why could chalitza? So what Rabbi Chaim says is that, just to answer the chalitza point, is that it's not like the Torah invests you with the power to effect a status change or to do this, and then so I'm empowered to like the same way I have a power to transfer the ownership of an object or to take possession of an object, and therefore it's I'm the one who's doing it, right? I, as an agent, as an adult agent, whatever, in the legal system, have the power to do those things. It's not like you have the power to the man or the woman doing chalitza to sever this relationship. The Torah is not saying that. What the Torah is saying is if you go through the ritual, the Torah will sever the relationship. Or similarly by yibum. If you go out and have sex, right? Why is yibum, even if it's an accidental act of sex, we learned before, why is it effective, right? When do you ever have that, if I accidentally purchase something of yours, I don't own it. I need to do it with das. But that's not true by yibum. So what Reb Chaim says is because here, what the Torah is saying is if you go through the act and have sex, or you go through the act and have chalitza, the Torah is the one that either creates the bond or severs the bond. It's not you're effecting that change. You're just going through the motions, and the Torah there, you did this thing, now the Torah creates that change of status. You're not the one empowered to create that change. So therefore, that's the logic why also you can't make it, why you can't have an agent do it. If I'm given power to take possession of an object or to give over the possession of my object, to marry a woman, to divorce a woman, I can transfer that power to an agent. That's how agency is possible. But if it's not that I've given power, it's just I go through the motions and the Torah makes the change, so then I can't create agency. I have to be the one going through the ritual. So therefore, and that's the same reason why I can't stipulate, because I, in the end, am not the one that determines whether this effect will take place or not. The Torah does it when certain conditions were met. So since the Torah is the one doing it, therefore, I'm not in a position to stipulate whether and under what conditions will it or won't it take effect. So that's the logic why. And if it's not given over to a shaliach, that means it's not something that you're invested with the power. If you were invested with the power, you could transfer that power. But since you can't transfer that power, clearly you're not invested. clearly it's the Torah or the legal system that is doing it once you do particular things, and therefore you're not empowered also to make stipulations. So that's a very important idea that we never fully fleshed out with Yibum and Chalitza. That's why the possibility that even a minor could do Chalitza, why the idea that Yibum doesn't necessarily require to be done with Das, and here why the Gemara is saying that you don't have to satisfy the condition. So you're allowed to deceive somebody, promise them money, and then go ahead, and the thing they in the end of the day intended to do the act of Chalitza, it'll take effect, and you don't need, and then it'll be effect even if the money isn't paid out, because the Chalitza was not, the condition was not binding. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Hahu da'asa l'kamid Rabbi Chia. A certain person came in front of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amarla, he said to her, Biti Amodi, my daughter, stand up, meaning he was basically telling her, time to, this man wants you to go home with you and do Yibum, take you as his wife, get up, go with him, do Yibum. So not in front of the court, hopefully, but anyway. Amarle, so she said to him, I will say in this case, my sitting in my place counts as standing, meaning I think I'm better off not going with him, was a sort of way of saying it. Some have the Girsa Amar Le Ima, her mother said this to him. But anyway, let's have she said it to him. Okay, actually, I'm better off sitting here, not going with him. Amarla. So he said to her, Yadatle, do you know him? Is like something up with this guy, this brother-in-law? Amarle, yes. Mamonuhu de Chazala. He sees that I've got money, or it's the mother speaking. He sees that she's got money. The Kabbai lemech lamina, and he wants to consume it from here. Basically, he's only interested in her in the money. He's going to do yibum, take her money, and then divorce her. Amarla, so he said to her, do you not want to do yibum? So Amarle, no, I don't want to do yibum. So Amarle, so he said to the man, the first case of tricking that we thought, which Rabbi Yochanan said was not good, do chalitza and that'll make you married to her. Now we said, what do you mean? We just said that's not going to work. But he had another trick up his sleeve. After he did chalitza with her, Amarle, he said to him, hashta mincha ifsla. You know what? The chalitza didn't work because A, it doesn't make you married to her, and B, it's true it didn't work to make you separated from her, but what it was effective of was it was a chalitza psula. You remember what the halach is about a chalitza psula? After a chalitza psula, you're not allowed to do yibum. So, okay, it didn't work. It didn't make you married. It also didn't make you chalutza, but it prevents, now you're not able to do yibum. Since you're now anyway not able to do yibum, might as well go ahead and do a good chalitza with her in order to free her. Okay, so he tricked him in a situation where now yibum was not possible, so now he had to do chalitza. Of course, that's a tricky situation to be in, because then the man, out of spite, might refuse to do the good chalitza. What? You tricked me, and now I can't do yibum? I'm refusing to do chalitza. So that's a question if that's really going to work. So now the better trick is to promise him money and not pay it up, which is now what we're going to see in the next story. Yes.
Is this Rabbi here the Tana?
I don't think so. It's a Rabbi Chia bar, what was it?
Bar
Abba. I don't think it's the same Rabbi Chia, okay. But you can check that. I'm not good with that.
That would make a difference because Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lakish
were later, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Although they were right in the same, they weren't so late after Rabbi Chia. I think there was overlap. Anyway, okay. Bas Chamuad Rav Papa. Now, the daughter of the mother-in-law of Rav Papa, which presumably means his wife's sister. Okay. Father-in-law, Chamuha. You're right. Otherwise, it'd be Chamosa. Thank you. Okay, the daughter of the father-in-law of Rav Papa. Okay, which probably means that it was like his wife's sister, but anyway, some relative. Okay, so obviously he was interested in protecting her interest. Naflu lifnei Yabam fell in front of the brother-in-law. Shein Hagunla was inappropriate for her. That should not be doing yibum. Asal kamid Abaye, so he came to Abaye. And he still wanted to do yibum, but Rav Papa, that was not the right thing to be done. He and Rav Papa wanted to protect his whatever sister-in-law, whoever she was. So Asal l'kamid Abaye, Amar Le. So Abaye said to the brother-in-law, Chalotzla b'tachat hakonsa. So Abaye was going to do that trick. Do chalitza, and through that you'll be married to her. Of course, as we know, that's not going to be a good chalitza, and it'll require another thing, and it's getting into some tricky territory. So, Rav Papa said to Abaye, don't you hold what Rabbi Yochanan says, that that's not going to be effective as creating a chalitza? So Abaye said to Rav Papa, so what should I say to him? So Amarle, say to him, agree to do chalitza, and she'll give you 200 zuz, which we know will work, and you won't have to pay, and the money won't be, and even without the money, it'll work. Lebazir de chalitza, so he did chalitza with her. Amallah. So now Abayi said to the woman, Zil Havle, give him the 200 zuz, not because he necessarily thought that the chalitza would not be good if she didn't pay up, but just because you promised to give him 200 zuz. So even if now the chalitza will work either way, you should give him what you promised. So Amalei, so Rav Papa said to Abaye, Meshatani bach avdalei. No, she just could say, I was tricking him. Now, meaning, and therefore forget that the chalitza was good regardless, which you've already established, but that also frees her from just sort of making a promise to give money. If you commit to somebody to give money for doing something for you, now Rashi says, if I say to you, I'm going to give you $200 on your birthday, that doesn't obligate me. But if I say I'm going to give you $200 for mowing the lawn, it does obligate me. That's called schirus. That's called hiring somebody. So if she said, I'm going to give you $200 for, 200 is a lot more, $2,000, $20,000 for doing chalitza, it might be the chalitza is good regardless, but why don't you have to pay him his fee? Right? This is a fee you agreed upon. So not in Dine Eben HaEzer, not in Dine her personal legal status, but in Dine Choshen Mishpat, just in terms of like legal, in terms of civil law. You should have to pay her. She should have to pay him the money she contracted. So if Papa said no, there's conditions where you could say that even in terms of Choshen Mishpat, even in terms of monetary obligation, you could claim I was only kidding. When are you allowed to make the claim I was only kidding? So let's take a look. Avdalei, that's what she did to him, an I was only kidding trick. Now, Milo Tanya, here's how we see that you can make that claim. We taught in the Brisa, somebody was running away from prison. And obviously this is like the Roman prison where he was, unjustly imprisoned. And there was a river crossing in front of him. And there was a raft. And he said to the, the raftsman, or the roper, the boatman, he said to him, Amarle, I told dinar Virani, take this dinar, which is a lot of money, take $100 and cross and help me cross the river. And then he does. He only has to pay him the going rate, which was, $1, not $100. Because, why? Because I was kidding you. Meaning, obviously, now he probably wasn't kidding, but the point is that it's sort of like highway robbery. If you hike up your rates to take advantage of somebody in a dire circumstance, then that person isn't obligated to pay you more than what the real rate is, not the way you took advantage of him. And then you can make the legal claim of Meshat Anibach. So here he's saying, you know what? Even in terms of Choshen Mishpat, she doesn't have to give him the money because normally chalitza is not an act that's paid for. Chalitza is supposed to be done as a mitzvah. It's supposed to be done for free. So any claim that she would pay him money is not a legally binding claim. Okay? So, as you see that he can say in that case, I was kidding you. Okay, so number one, we've established that the chalitza will work even without paying the money because you cannot stipulate chalitza. Number two, how about the legal obligation to pay the money because you agreed on a fee? Isn't this just like a fee? And the answer is no, you cannot be, that type of an agreement you're not bound by because that is it's taking advantage of somebody in a circumstance and that's not really what the fee for the services is. So therefore you're not bound to pay the money. So Abaye was somehow frustrated by all of this. Not exactly clear why, because Abaye and Rav Papa wanted the same thing out of the circumstance, but maybe Abaye didn't realize that there wasn't even going to be the payment of money or whatever. Anyway, he said to Rav Papa, hey, Avucha heicha, where's your father? Amalei b'masa, he's in the city. Imcha heicha, where's your mother? Amalei b'masa, in the city. So Yarivu einei v'shchivan. So Abaye gave them the evil eye and they died. So, like yesterday we had children dying, now we have parents dying, anyway, I really don't understand this, I must say, because like what did he do that was so wrong? I mean, Abaye was also gonna trick him, gonna trick the the brother-in-law. He was gonna say, do this and you'll be married to her. But Papa just had a better trick. So it's not at all clear to me what this is about. I don't know if your footnotes makes any suggestions about why Abaye was so upset. What? To make up a story to explain it.
I mean, I didn't make it up, but they give an explanation from Hagras Yavis.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it says, Abaye did not cast his gaze upon Rav Papa's parents for the purpose of exacting punishment from them. For indeed neither they nor Rav Papa was deserving of punishment. Rather, by contemplating Rav Papa's good fortune and having the support of his nearby parents, Abba inadvertently caused God to examine their deeds.
All right, fine.
Found undeserving in this parable.
Got it. Okay, wonderful. So it was not so helpful. Anyway, a short little Tosfos that's interesting in terms of the legal issues here about agreeing to pay for something when you're being taken advantage of. Tosfos says, where somebody's asking for an exorbitant fee where the standard is much of a lesser fee. Now, of course, if you're paying somebody to sneak you across a river because the prison guards are after him, and part of what you're paying him for is because he's actually risking his life, that by helping you do that, that's a different story. The point wasn't that. The point was that this guy's just taking advantage of this person in dire circumstances, but presumably it's coming at no greater risk or cost to himself. But Tosa says, but if there normally is a big fee, then you can't say that I was kidding. Meaning the claim is only when when the person was being taken advantage of. Okay, the claim was not in these circumstances where there actually was a fee to be paid, or we could say where by the person agreeing in these circumstances, he actually is, taking a serious risk or cost. Okay, back to the Gemara. Tanar Banan chalitza mutet kshera. A tricked chalitza is kosher, which we established. Get mutet pasul. A tricked get is pasul because, as we said, if a trick means you promise to do it for payment and then the payment isn't made, but that's normally a condition. And if the condition isn't met, the get is no good. Right? We explained why chalitza was different. It's not given over to agency, so it cannot be given over to condition. But at least in the case of get, that's a normal type of a thing which is given for agency and which you can stipulate. So if there was a stipulation made and it wasn't satisfied, the get is no good, which of course gets us to the which of course gets us to the whole issue about extortion and so on. Chalitza mu'asit psula, a forced chalitza, meaning nobody's being tricked. Basin is just saying, do the chalitza, we're going to beat you up. It's invalid. Get me'usa, a forced get, kasher is kasher. Okay, if the basin, right, the whole problem nowadays is when you try things like New York State get law, etc., you say it's being forced by the secular authorities. But if the halachic authorities are forcing a get, then it's considered legitimate. We'll learn about that when we learn gittin. So the Gemara says the get musa kasher. Now, what's the difference about being forced? Why is chalitza no good and get good? So that's what the Gemara asks. Heichidami, what's the case? Idama wrote Sani. If the person is saying, after being forced by the Beis Din, fine, I'm doing it willingly. Now that you're twisting my arm, I'm doing it willingly. So afilu chalitza nami, then even chalitza should be kosher. Even though we forced you, now you're agreeing to do it willingly. If he did not say I want to do it willingly, afilu get nami lo. So even a get wouldn't be good. Meaning, the way forcing a get works is you beat the guy up, and then he says, I agree. Okay, so and when we learn gittin, we'll learn more why that's legally valid. But the point is, if that's legally valid by a get, it's legally valid by anything. What we're saying is that the beating up before doesn't matter. What matters now is the I agree. So there's nothing special about get that should be true by other things. So the Gemara says you're right. This is how it has to be read. Chalitza mutet le'olam kasher, v'get mutet le'olam pasul. A tricked chalitza is always kasher. A tricked get is always pasul. Now, chalitza muasit, v'get mu'useh, a forced chalitza and a forced get, zimni kasher, zimni pasul. Sometimes kasher, sometimes pasul. Hadam arotzani, hadalo amarotzani. And the difference is whether in the end he says, I'm doing it willingly or not. So against the simple read of the Breita, saying there really is a big difference there's no difference between get and chalitza when it comes to being compelled. Okay, and now the Gemara is going to look at that. To time we thought in Brisa, yakrivoto. This is about a person bringing a korban. He shall offer it. So that you force him. If a person has an obligation to bring a korban, and he's refusing to do it, Basin will force him to fulfill his obligation. Yachubel karcho, maybe even against his will. Talmud Lomar lirtzono. He should do it with his will. So yakrivoto, he should be made forced to bring it willingly. So how do you force somebody willingly? Hakeitzad and you beat him up till he says he wants to do it. So then, similarly, you find by a get. You force him until he says, I want to do it. And that's the same true. That's true by korban and get. It's true by chalitza. So just to give you a tiny little perspective on this, the Gemara says, for example, that if somebody had a gun held to his head and agreed to sell something or buy something, that it also would be binding, which is surprising, right? You would think that would be a forced sale, no good. But the Gemara's logic it uses is that anytime, when a non-commercial society, which says, well, anytime you sell something, you're doing it because you're forced by dire circumstances. If you're selling off your home or your car or your furniture, right? It's because, your poverty, your dire circumstances are forcing you. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what motivated you. It matters that right now you want to do it. And the difference between desire and motivation is basically the difference. So the Gemara says the same is true by kofin, somebody holding a gun to your head. You might not, your motivation was external. Okay, the same way poverty was a motivation, the gun to your head is external. But right now, whatever your motivation, whatever the source of your motivation was, you actually do want to sell it because you don't want to get your head blown off, right? So you don't want to get Beit Din to beat you up. So it's quite fascinating that the Gemara actually allows for the fact that, compelled transactions are legally binding because by distinguishing between motivation and desire. So the question is always true, but certainly in a good number of cases, the Gemara actually allows for that. There might be cases that are different. So contracts the same as sales and so on. But anyway, it's important to be aware of that. Yes.
I don't think this is discussed in your Shalmi, but
Yep.
Rambam paskins that anyone who doesn't contribute the proper assessment to the communal charity fund gets lashes.
That is true. Why is that relevant?
Well, it's another example of a convert. I mean, he can't say, I didn't really want to do that and get the money back.
Well, yeah, but that's different because that's seen as like a mitzvah, and we're trying to just compel you to do a mitzvah, like we compel you to take lulav or something.
That's more like
okay.
Can they be imprisoned as opposed to a physical act of coercion?
Yeah, that's even easier. That's what they do in Israel now.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then it leads now also that gets to a whole discussion that maybe withholding of privileges is not the same as actual, instilling. Imposing punishments. So beating somebody else. So that's why, you can take away somebody's driver's license and this and that and the other thing because you're not just you're withholding privileges. So to what degree is putting somebody in prison just withholding the privilege of freedom? As opposed to actually, what's the line between withholding a privilege and actually, imposing a penalty? But that's also relevant for this. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. We did that. Okay. Rav Schara, Rav Huna. Chotzin afa pishein makirin. You can do, Beit Din can agree to do a chalitza ceremony even though they don't know who the guy is. Mimanim afa pishein makirim. And they could agree to do a mian ceremony even though they don't know who the guy is. Lefikach ein koshin get chalitza elim kein makirin. Since the Beit Din will do it without knowing who the guy is, the witnesses can't write the document that, oh, we saw so-and-so do this woman did a chalitza with this guy in Beit Din, because if they don't know who the guy is, because the Beit Din might not have known for certain that the guy was her brother-in-law. It's not like people could just come up with two pieces of picture ID. So a woman comes with a man in front of Beit Din. This is my brother-in-law. They go through the act. Now, of course, the woman maybe hired this guy off the street, so that could trick the Beit Din to think that it's the brother-in-law, right? So the more reasonable situation would be to say that the Beit Din should refuse to do it until they have evidence that this is the right guy. The first position is a little bit strange. The Beit Din can go ahead and do it. Maybe the woman won't be able to get a Beit Din later or whatever. Maybe she's just doing it so that she'll know that she's doing the right thing. And she doesn't need any proof from the court, but she wants to be free. So the Beit Din can go ahead and do it, but you cannot give her any document of evidence for that unless because you might not know who the guy is. Because the guy might not be the right guy. So since the Beit Din does it without knowing, then they can't provide her with a document. So therefore. So where were we? So if the witnesses cannot write the document just by the virtue of the fact that the Beit Din did the ceremony, to write the document, the witnesses would have to know who the guy was. Okay, That makes sense. The chayshin and lebeisin toan, because we're concerned that a future beis din might make a mistake, see the document, not realize that the witnesses didn't know the guy. So therefore, before giving any document, we're going to make sure that the witnesses know the guy, because the beis din doesn't necessarily know the guy. For Rava Didei Amar, but Rava on his own says, "Ein chotzim elim kein makir and ein memanim elim kein makir," which makes total sense. You refuse to do the ceremony unless you know who the parties are. The fikach, and since the beis din refuses to do the ceremony unless they know who the parties are, the witnesses are koshin get chalita af bishen makir and koshin get min af bishen makir. They can write the document to prove that this happened because they don't have to know the guy, because the beis din wouldn't have done it without the beis din knowing who the guy was, so they can go ahead and write the document. The lo cheshin le beis din, we're not afraid that some later beis din will make a mistake as a result of this document, because now the document is totally fine, because the first beis din knew what they were doing, and made sure they did it with the right person. Okay, let's next Mishnah. There's different ways to read that Gemara, but that was basically Rashi's ways. Let's go ahead and look at the next Mishnah. Okay, we will finish this parak today. Mitzvah is basically just a Mishnah and an easy Gemara. Mitzvah chalitza. Finally, at the end of the parak, we actually go through the steps by steps. Mitzvah chalitza. Bahu v'yivimto lebeis din. He and the sister-in-law came to the beis din. Ve'ein masin lo eitzah hugenes lo. They give him proper advice that's fitting for him, meaning based on whether he should do chalitza or should do yibum. Shenemar v'karu lo ziknei yiro v'dibru elav. Or V'dabru, I think it's V'dabru elav. So they call him and they speak to him. So meaning, first they advise him which of the two to do, chalitza or yibum. Now, then they're deciding that they're going to do chalitza. He omeres me'ein Yevami hakim lachiv shem b'Yisrael. My brother-in-law does not want to establish his brother's name. Lo avayabmi. He does not want to do the yibum act. Hu amar, and then he says lo chafatzi lekachta. Right? Everybody reads their script. Right? He says, I don't want to take her. Right, and we said before that the kriya is not ma'akev, but this is how you do the kriya. And they say it in Hebrew, and the Gemara, the Mishnah Sota says this is one of the, discusses which things have to be in the original Hebrew and which can be in translation. Okay, now So the sister-in-law draws close to him in the presence of the elders, of the beis din. So basically just quoting the psukim to tell you what you do next, okay? She removes the shoe and then she spits. Now the Mishnah sticks in. It has to be visible spit. And we discussed before whether the spitting is ma'akev. Then she responds and says, so that's her next recital of the verse. Adkan hayu makrin. Until this point, would they recite, sort of have her recite after them? They would say, and then they would recite afterwards. She would recite afterwards. When Rabbi Horkanis read under the tree, the Allah in Kfar Itam, the Gamar is called a parsha. He finished the parsha, meaning he didn't just have her say, he said, what's the end of the pasuk is, V'nikrashimo b'Yisrael beis chalut hana'al. Right, that's part of, meaning who is talking at that stage? Is she saying his name will be called the house of the removed shoe, or is the narrator of the pasuk saying, right? Is it says that she shall say this will be done, and she says V'nikrashimo b'Yisrael, or is the verse saying his name will be called? So when he did it, he had her say the end of the verse, V'nikrashimo b'Yisrael beis chalut hana'al, and after he did that, everybody then got into the practice of having her say the entire end of the pasuk. Okay, mitzvah b'dayanim. Now, the mitzvah of declaring that he is the house of the withdrawn shoe is on the judges. Not in the students. Okay, it's the actual judges, not their not the attendants. I mean, not the whatever. Not the students of the judges. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mitzvah kol ha'omdim sham. No, it's not just the judges and it's not just the students. Everybody present in the ceremony should take, because it's b'Yisrael. Sham lomar chalut hana'al, removed shoe, which makes sense. It says b'Yisrael, but until now we've been interpreting b'Yisrael to refer to the dayanim, which has gone into halachas about what are the criteria for the dayanim. Yes, Charlie.
Rabbi Hyrcanus.
Mm-hmm.
Would he be the Rabbi Hyrcanus who had several sons who are mentioned in the Talmud?
I guess so. Yeah.
He'd be pretty early in that case.
Yeah, he is early. Okay. I'm Rav Yehuda. Now, a lot of what we're about to say we've already said before. I'm Rav Yehuda. Mitzvah chalitza kor'ah v'kor'eh. So the mitzvah of chalitza is she recites, then he recites. The choletzes for okeket, she removes the shoe, she does a spitting, the Quran, then she recites the final verses. So that's just a nice distilled way of saying it, right? Korah v'koreh, choletzes v'okekas v'korah. Okay? So the Gemara says, my kamash, Milan, what are you telling us? It's our Mishnah. Okay, you could also say it's psukim. Anyway, so I would say he's not telling us a big chiddush, he's just giving us a nice, simple way to remember it. But the Gemara says no. He's teaching us mitzvah haki, that's the mitzvah. He says mitzvah is to do it this way. The afich leislam ba, but if you reverse some of the orders, it's not a problem. As we said, if the spitting comes earlier, the verses are out of order, the verses b'diavad aren't even ma'akev. We taught similarly, whether the spitting first or the chalitza first, either way it works. Amar Abaye, Haiman Demakri get chalitza, the person who's reciting the chalitza ceremony. It says get chalitza, but it doesn't mean actually the writ. It means like it's just doing like the script, might be the better word here. The person who's doing the reciting of the script, meaning the bass in that's saying the recite after me. Okay. Lo likri lidida, when you're having her recite, don't say to her, lo l'chudei, v'ava yabmi l'chudei. Don't say lo, say lo, lo. Now say ava yabmi, because that actually puts the comma in the wrong place, right? The mashma, that implies ava yavmi. My brother-in-law does want to. Lo, no, it's not true. Ava yabmi, he wants to do it. Don't say that. Ella lo ava yabmi. Say it in one phrase. He doesn't want to do it. Lo likri lididei, when they're having him read it, don't say lo l'chudei, first lo, and then chafatzti l'chudei. I desire. Lo, it's not true. Chafatzti, I do want to. Don't do that. Demajma chafatzti, I want to. L'chachta, to take her. Ella lo chafatzti l'chachta, I don't want to take her. Rava says no. Afsuke milsa, it's just making a pause. Afsuke milsa leisamba, we're not bothered by that. Like the context makes it clear. There's another milsa which is not, he's just making a pause, but asuke milsa, he's just completing his sentence. If he says lo and then he says avaya mi, that's clearly completing the sentence he began with. It's the same point, but it makes a little bit more sense. Like he's emphasizing, don't get worried. He's completing his sentence. Okay. Ravashi found Rav Kana to commit stire and makri lo avaya mi. He was going to pains to make sure that he said the whole thing in one sentence. Lo avaya mi. Now, why are you stire? How hard is it to say that? But maybe it's somebody that's not so literate, right? And if somebody not so literate, it's maybe not so easy for them to remember three words, maybe even meaningless words, and it's a language they don't understand all at one time. It's a lot easier to do one word at a time. So he was going to a lot of pains to try to do the whole phrase at once. Amalei, he said to him, don't you hold what Rava says, that if you make pauses, it's not a problem? Amalei, no. Moda Rava below avayabmi. Rava agrees that the verse, he does not want to yabmi, which is being used as a verb. He does not want to do the yibum act. There you cannot make any pauses. Now, why is that different? So Rashi says because that verse comes right in the middle, meaning it me'ein yevami lahakim shem la'achiv. Right, what is it? So if it doesn't, if the verse starts, like if he starts lo chafatzi lekachta, nothing preceded it. So presumably it's not lo period chafatzi lekachta, it's lo chafatzi lekachta. But here where it appears in the middle of a verse, then it could be lo. No, that's not true. Somehow, because if there's a word that precede it, the lo could more easily be seen as not connected to the following words, but a rejection of what she said before. Okay, so for that phrase lo avayabmi, he was made sure to say it all as one. Okay. Amar Abaye, Haiman the cause of Gita the Chalitza. If somebody is writing the get of Chalitza, and here the get means the actual writ of evidence that it occurred. Haiman the cause of Gita the Chalitza, Lichtov Hachi. Have him write it this way. Akrinuhu lidida, we recited the verses for her, mean me'ein yevami, ad avayabmi. From the beginning of me'ein yevami, my brother-in-law doesn't want to, until the end of the verse, meaning ... they don't write out the whole verse. Say, we recited from this part to that part. From me'ein yevami to avayabmi, he does not desire to do yibum. Akrinuhu lidida, and we had him recite, mean lo, from the part of lo ad likachta, until the words to take her. Now that's very bizarre. Why not just say lo chafatzi lekachta? They go out of your way to remove one of the three words and replace it with the word ad or put in 3 dots. So we're going to see that what he's particularly the concern is that you're not allowed to write biblical verses without doing sirtut. Sirtut is scoring. If you ever look at a Sefer Torah, there are lines. Actually, people are not aware, but the sirtut is lines above, not lines below. Right? It's not obviously inked in lines. It's like like scratched in lines. Yeah. But the line will look like this, and then it'll be like, a vowel, and like it becomes also the upper line, right? The top of the letters are there, and then you have like the bigger letters which go be above it. Anyway, that's called sirtut, scoring. So they didn't score these documents, and maybe even if they did score the documents, we'll see in a minute, you don't want to be sort of like writing out biblical verses in a document if it's not really a Sefer Torah or a Megillah. So therefore, specifically take out middle words of the verse, even if it's just one word, in order not to write a whole section of the verse, right? And 3 or 4 words already requires sirtut. Okay, so min lo ad lekachta. We had him read from the word lo until lekachta. And then we had her read the verse, mean kacha, from the word kacha, v'ad, until the word of chalut hana'al. Okay, so the beginning and the end are no more than 3 words. Okay, you don't have three words all in a row. Mar Zutra is start date for Kasiv L'Kula Parsha. So Mar Zutra made the sirtut and he wrote out the whole thing. Okay, now it says L'Kula Parsha, sounds like he might have written out not just the whole section that they said, but maybe the entire parsha. That's what it sounds like. Anyway, Maskif Lamar Bar Idi, the Mar Bar Idi asked, but you're not allowed to write individual sections of the Torah. I mean, you can write a mezuzah, you can write tefillin, you can write a Sefer Torah, but you can't write out individual sections if they're not in the context of some type of a Sefer. So the Gemara says, and nevertheless we rule like Mar Zutra. Now, why is that? What's this idea of not writing it out separately? So if you look at Rashi, he says, Rashi says, Parsha, about 20 lines on the bottom, Parsha b'fnei atma, Meseches Gittin, Perek HaNizakin, Diktani ein kos Megillah letinok li'islamit ba. You don't write like a little mini sefer. Okay, but we rule you do write. You can write out a section with sirtut. The kosfin you can write it out as long as you do the sirtut. The lo dami lekosev megillah letinok lislami. The hasam adaita the parshas laksivle. There you're writing it to serve as a little mini sefer. You have to write the whole Torah if you're going to write it. Maybe an individual Breshit, Shemot. You can write maybe a whole chumash of the Torah, or something for the mezuzah, but you can't write smaller units. This is not written as a mini sefer. This is written to inform what it was that was recited. And it's not written as a sefer. Therefore, if you're doing it for the purpose of this document, it's allowed. Let's finish up the parak. Okay. 5. Amar Bayi, Rakakav the Kalatzaso Haruach. She spat him, and the wind blew it away. Lo asav lo klum. It doesn't count as a spitting. Now, it depends whether spitting is needed b'di'evet, but whether it is or is it needed, it doesn't count as a spitting if it didn't go in his presence. It was blown away from the wind. So my time, what's the reason? V'yarka b'fanav ba'inan. It has to be in his presence. Hilkach. Now, sometimes there is a spit. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Will the wind make a difference? Who aroch v'hi gotza. If he's tall and he's short, kalatzaso aruach ika b'fanav. Then even if the wind blows it away, as soon as it went out of her mouth, it was in his presence because he was taller than she was. He was standing right in front of her, right? So then that's fine. He arochav, he goats, who goats, he's tall and he's short, so it leaves her mouth, it's not yet in his presence because it's above him, right? The spit is up there, he's down here, right? So in that case, so that's where it's a problem. But inan ademati lahadi ape, the spit has to get in front of his face, not. It doesn't hit him, it goes to the ground, but it has to be in front of his face, right? If it's higher than him and the wind blows it away before it gets in front of his face, it's no good. Once it gets in front of his face, then if it's blown away, it's not a problem. Amar Rava, said Rava, Achol tuma v'raksa, if she ate garlic and spat, Achla gargishta v'raksa, or some other thing. What's gargishta? What does your English say? Clay? All right, whatever. Anyway, lo asav lo klum.
Aramaic word for clay.
Okay, fine. Clay, she didn't do anything. My time, it doesn't count as spitting. Why? She has to spit on her own accord, not that something else is generating the spit. Okay, Veleka. The judges have to see the spit when it leaves the mouth of the sister-in-law. To the eyes of the elders, and she shall spit. So the spit has to be seen directly by them. The act of spitting. Okay, declaring his name, the house of the Rushu, so first it says the judges do it, that's the Israel, and then it says then another opinion, everybody standing there does it, and the parah concludes, Tanya Mitan Brisa, Amreb Yehuda, Pamachas Hayinu, Yoshim Lifnei Rabbi Tarfon, once we were standing in front of Rabbi Tarfon, Ubasa Yevamot lachlot, and the sister-in-law came to Chalitza, V'amarlanu, and Rabbi Tarfon said to us, Anu kulchem, say all of you, Chalutzanal, 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 3 times, like Hakol Mutarim Lecha, Hakol Mutruim Lecha, right? Mutar Lecha, Mutarlach, Mutarlach. So that's make it clear that that's the status. That's and that sort of formalizes the end of the process. Hadron Alach Mitzvahs Chalitza. Okay.
This is sounding more demeaning to the man.